These lucky people survived the impossible. In a stunning turn of events, Thai businessman Patak Rangsamma somehow cheated death after a high-speed collision tore his Lamborghini Gallardo clean in half. In the middle of a heavy rainstorm, Rangsamma was driving his supercar at speeds in excess of 90 miles per hour when he lost control and collided with a tree. The force of the impact was so severe that the car was ripped apart by the front and rear sections. Remarkably, Rangsamma stepped out of the wreckage without a scratch. An arriving paramedic expected the worst, but was shocked to find the businessman standing calmly by the roadside on his phone. Rangsamma attributed his survival to a rare Buddhist amulet he wore during the accident, worth tens of thousands of dollars. The sacred amulet was believed to provide spiritual protection, and I think he may have got his money's worth. Aaron Langworthy, an Australian traveler, had a horrifying experience while bungee jumping off a bridge. As she leaped into the picturesque abyss, her bungee cord unexpectedly snapped, sending her plunging 360 feet into the crocodile-infested river below. Despite the horrific fall, Aaron miraculously survived. Although her nightmare was far from over, Aaron's harness cord was tangled, anchoring her underwater as she quickly ran out of oxygen. Thankfully, she was able to yank the cord free and rise to the surface, where she was rescued by an employee of the bungee company. Once the adrenaline wore off, the extent of Aaron's injuries became obvious. Unbelievably, she had no broken bones, but the majority of her body was covered in deep purple bruises. She'd ingested a lot of blood and water, and both of her lungs had partially collapsed. Aaron was airlifted to a hospital in South Africa, where she made a full recovery. In a terrifyingly close call, a Norwegian surgeon, Richard Henriksen, survived a near-death experience when an acrobatic base jump he attempted went horribly wrong. While swinging from a high bar placed near a cliff, the bar broke in half, catapulting Henriksen off the side of the cliff. Onlookers watched helplessly as Richard disappeared over the edge, unsure if he had met his doom at the bottom of the mountain. Astonishingly, he managed to open his parachute just in time, narrowly avoiding his head on the cliffside and escaping the falling bar. In a heart-stopping tale of survival, the then 27-year-old truck driver Caleb Whitby was driving home when his car became sandwiched between two big rigs in a catastrophic accident. Witnesses of the carnage on the icy Oregon freeway were amazed to find out Caleb had actually survived the pileup and remained fully conscious throughout the whole ordeal. Despite this, Caleb was beyond trapped. His twisted wreck was wedged between two metal trailers, and a heavy steering column was pressing against his leg. His head poked out from the top of the crumpled car, where he remained awake, alert, and chatting with first responders. Even more miraculous, when Caleb was finally removed from the wreckage, he was able to walk away having sustained nothing more than an injured eyebrow and a scratch on his hand. It was just another day at work for construction worker Ron Hunt before a freak accident would change his life forever. While standing on a ladder drilling overhead, the ladder suddenly gave way. This caused Ron to drop the drill before losing balance and falling face first onto the 18-inch drill bit. Unfortunately for Ron, the drill just happened to be facing upright and aimed directly at his head. Yet remarkably, his brain remained unharmed. Rather than impaling his frontal lobe, the drill somehow just pushed his brain to the side. Rushed to the hospital, doctors scrambled to move the massive tool from Ron's face, choosing to unscrew the drill bit instead of just cutting it off. Now Ron's friends call him Miracle Man. Carlos Rodriguez has a rather striking appearance and a love of hats, but he didn't always have half a head. After a drug-induced car accident several years ago, doctors were forced to remove a section of Carlos's brain to save his life. The intense and drastic surgery left him with an unsightly gap where his skull used to be. But Haffy, as Carlos is affectionately nicknamed, isn't bothered. In fact, Carlos doesn't seem to be at all affected by his obvious disability and actually relishes in his unique appearance. Now a campaigner against drug and drink driving, you can ask him to recall what happened to him, and I'm sure he'll give you a piece of his mind. South African football player Rui Mahumutsa survived an accident that probably should have taken his life. The star defender for Johannesburg's Orlando Pirates was out driving his white BMW 3 Series when his car suddenly lost control on a wet patch of road. Spinning out, Rui's car slammed rear first into the piercing guardrail. In an instant, the guardrail had literally skewered his ride, exiting the back of the vehicle via the windscreen. Shocking photos taken of the scene show his car completely impaled. Not only is Rui's survival a literal miracle, but the fact he walked away with only minor injuries is practically unbelievable. A man from suburban Chicago had a harrowing experience when he accidentally shot a nail into his skull while using a nail gun. Jason Atuyo was on a ladder working on a wall when the recoil caused his gun to swing back and press against his head, driving a 3.25-inch nail into his brain. Wiping a small amount of blood off his head, Atuyo was convinced the nail gun had just grazed him. Little did he know that the entire nail had forced its way into his skull. Miraculously, the nail had entered cleanly without causing further damage or sending bone fragments into his brain. Atuyo remained unaware of the nail's presence until the following day when he began to feel nauseous. After taking an X-ray, doctors couldn't believe what they were seeing: a fully intact nail that had missed critical parts of his brain by mere millimeters. Doctors successfully removed the nail during a 2-hour surgery, and Atuyo did not experience any loss of motor function. Most people make a wish when they see a shooting star, but Ruth Hamilton's instead thanking her lucky stars. The Canadian grandmother from British Columbia was asleep in bed when she was suddenly awoken by a booming explosion and the sensation of dust falling on her face. Initially fearing an intruder, Ruth looked around only to discover a smoldering rock on the pillow next to her head. A fist-sized meteorite weighing approximately 2.8 pounds had smashed through her roof and ceiling before coming to rest on the pillow next to where Ruth was sleeping. The dust she felt was actually powdered drywall debris falling from the ceiling. A few inches to the right, and Ruth would have been the second person ever to be hit by a meteor. You'd think after 5 Final Destination movies, people would learn not to drive behind logging trucks. Well, one driver obviously didn't get the memo as he drove along a highway in northwest Georgia. According to a sheriff that attended the scene, the driver was distracted, probably grabbing something from the passenger side just as the impact occurred. Had the driver's head been upright and in the normal position during the crash, he would have very likely been impaled. Instead, the logs that penetrated the Nissan's cabin via the windshield ended up wedging his head between them. Despite the apocalyptic crash scene, the driver sustained relatively minor injuries, including a broken collarbone and other fractures resulting from the impact. In a remarkable incident in Durban, South Africa, a car flew off the road and crashed through the roof of a house in the KwaMakathua township. When questioned, the driver explained that he had driven over a ramp, expecting the road to continue. When it didn't, he found himself hurtling towards the world's most inconvenient parking space. What made this accident even more incredible is the fact that the intruding car narrowly missed the homeowner who was sleeping in the next room. Thankfully, both the driver and homeowner escaped without injury.